the case of the Tomahawk missiles, because after the talk between the two presidents, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, he said that he doesn't like to send them because the United States needs these missiles and they don't want to send them to Ukraine. Today, we've learned that CNN reported that the Pentagon has approved sending long range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. It doesn't negatively impact US stockpile. So it says that if you want to send them, you can send them. What is going on? Do you think that after all, we're going to see the Tomahawk missiles in Ukraine and some sort of escalation?
Okay, so first of all, it's a clear indication that there are different factions within the administration, within the blob, the deep state, the military industrial complex that have different agendas that they're pushing on Trump, right? I mean, that it's not nothing new. It's not a surprise. There's no secret that this administration does not have a unity of foreign policy purpose. In fact, it's all over the place. And resulting, Donald Trump's 180-degree turns on with some pure all capital letters social media rant from one position 180 degrees to the opposite a few days later, right? We're all well accustomed to this, and it must be said that the US's adversaries, Russia, China, Iran, they're well used to this too, right? Dmitry Medvedev has told us before, what's the best way to deal with this is to really not pay any attention to Trump's social media posts. I mean, other than as infotainment, right? That's really what it is. Are you not entertained? Is this not why you elected this overgrown narcissistic man-child to this office? Because you wanted to be entertained, ultimately, right? That's what happened. Second of all, if they do get transferred, who cares? Who cares? This is a 1980s era Top Gun cruise missile, right? This is 2025. Russian air defense and electronic warfare has already defeated the Storm Shadow, the Scalp, the whatever Neptune Flamingo nonsense the Kiev regime has put up there, the U.S. ATACMS, the HIMARS, the ground launch small diameter bomb, JDAMs, everything they've thrown, Russian air defense and electronic warfare have defeated, right? There was this headline in I believe the Wall Street Journal, already over a year ago, that Western high-tech weapons work against Russia in Ukraine up until they don't. I mean, that's the kicker, of course, right? Russia has, adapts to them very quickly. And I'm sure people who have followed me are sick of this analogy, but it's like the Borg in Star Trek. You get 3 shots with your phaser, and you better make them count, because after that, the Borg's shields have adapted, and then you're going to be Borgized. So that's the situation. Russia is not afraid of the Tomahawk missile. It is not a hypersonic, right? It's a slow-moving, relatively big cruise missile. Cruise missiles, they present unique problems, but Russia has lots of air defense that are specifically designed to deal with cruise missiles, not the S-400s per se, but the smaller systems. And yeah, they'll get a few hits in. They always will. Particularly against soft targets, oil refineries, and the like. But ultimately, they can only do so much damage to these things, right? There is there is, more importantly, I guess, would be the political precedent. Because we know, all right, it's been admitted, Trump has admitted that they would have to have U.S. personnel firing these weapons. He admitted it outright. We've said it long times before. The German chancellor at the time, Olaf Scholz, when he was refusing to send the Taurus, he made that clear about the British, the Storm Shadow, the Scalp, the U.S. ATACMS. The same thing with this. This, it's a bit of sleight of hand and propaganda that, with this. Oh, they were transferred to the Kiev regime. No, When a Storm Shadow makes a hit in Russia, the United Kingdom has fired a cruise missile into Russia. That's the situation, right? And the same thing. Now that is a problematic, and it's made more problematic because theoretically the Tomahawk can be nuclear tipped, right? It can carry a nuclear warhead. It was originally conceived of as a strategic weapon, and yeah, yes, I agree that it is unlikely, but the Russian military has to deal in contingencies. They can't deal in unlikelihoods and all of that. But that is why Russia has rolled out with a great deal of fanfare the presentation of the Burevestnik, the nuclear powered, nuclear capable cruise missile that can circumnavigate the globe as many times as necessary. And the Poseidon, the new nuclear powered underwater drone slash torpedo strategic, right? That evidently has the ability to generate a radioactive tsunami to inundate an entire coastline. I mean, a proper James Bond villain doomsday weapon, that one. Let's be honest about that, right? This is meant to deter the US, right? That is what it is. And then Trump's response to that is to declare nuclear tests, like an insecure child, like that's going to impress the Russians, like no, they'll just conduct their own nuclear tests. Or his inane statements, we don't need to go 8,000, we don't need a missile to go 8,000 miles. We've got nuclear submarines off Russia's coast. That's well and true, but Russia has nuclear submarines off your coast too. And they have the Burevestnik and the Poseidon, right? Capabilities that you just don't have, right? Yes, they are exotic weapons at this moment, right? But they could be very well. The New York Times called them science fiction weapons. Well, that's saying quite a lot from the country that you've routinely derided as a gas station masquerading as a country, or Nigeria with snow, or Russia doesn't make anything, or Russia can't innovate anything. Now Russia is developing doomsday science fiction weapons to use against you. So either again, some mad Bond villain is suddenly taking control in Russia, or your narrative has been broken for decades about Russia. I venture that it's more likely to be the latter. So, I mean, there are considerations, but ultimately, if they send the Tomahawks, they will never be able to send enough of them, and they will, not be anywhere near effective enough to change the outcome of this conflict. Yeah, they can raise the costs to Russia a certain amount. But when we see the front line crumbling the way it is, right, in multiple places, Russia doesn't care. They are confident. They are succeeding. The Kiev regime's, hotly held defensive lines in the Donbass, where they waited the entire defense of their country on, are crumbling. The Kiev regime's military doesn't have the infantry, doesn't have the manpower now to defend, to counterattack, to do anything really. So the Tomahawks would be a last desperate cry at escalation. I mean, what are they going to send next? The F-35, the Death Star. I mean, it's hard to take the threat of the Tomahawk very seriously sitting in Russia. I mean, I just found out a few hours ago that the Kiev regime launched, I guess, every drone it had, every long-range strike drone it had accumulated at Russia last night. 700 drones, with a considerable portion of them destined for Moscow. I live in Moscow, and I just found out that there was a 700 drone attack a few hours ago. Because who would know otherwise? Because few, if any, get through Russia's air defense and electronic warfare. and the Tomahawk would fare ultimately little better. And then the biggest threat there would be how Russia would respond, right? Whether for political considerations they would feel. But even then, I think it's unlikely that they would strike back against the US or even US bases in Germany. They would just take it out on the proxy. I mean, that because why? Because they're winning inside of a box, and they're winning handily inside of that box. And they've done very well by not allowing themselves to be provoked outside of that box where they are winning this handily. They don't need a direct war with the US and all of NATO, right? Why spoil what is an inevitable victory in Ukraine at this point by a nuclear Armageddon with the United States? Why allow themselves to be provoked to that? So even if the Tomahawks are fired, they've fired Storm Shadows and Scalps. Yeah, the Tomahawks have a longer range. There's no question about that. But they're also less modern, less stealthy, less effective than the Storm Shadow or the Scalp, right? And no more effective certainly than the Attackums. So if they do, they do, but it's not going to change anything at this point. It's stay focused on the battlefront, the long range strikes. Russia has pummeled Ukraine with drones and missiles in the thousands. And they don't have any air defense left at this point. All the Western air defense is attrited away, as well as, the Soviet legacy air defense, the far more effective Soviet legacy air defense that the Kiev regime started out this war with. And they're still fighting. I mean, that's the thing, right? The long range strikes can do damage. There's no question. But do they bring a country to its knees? Would they stop the SMO? Where they make Russia change their foreign policy? No. It wouldn't change the results on the battlefield, and it wouldn't change anything at a strategic level. So, not that bothered about.
Looking at Ukraine today, I think the Tomahawk missiles, drones, all these, these sort of rhetorics on the part of the West is the continuation. The key issue behind all of these arguments is the continuation of the conflict in Ukraine. And the main goal, it seems to me, that for the British government is to outlast the Trump administration. Because if in the aftermath of the Trump administration, they can do whatever they want. Because if, let's assume, I don't know if the Republicans gonna have any sort of chance to win in 2028 if they don't put an end to the conflicts they're facing right now in Ukraine, in the Middle East. Nothing is happening.
Why? Americans don't care about America's wars. They don't care about foreign policy.
But the society is divided from within, Mark. You remember what was the main issue with the Democratic Party? It was the case of Gaza, the case of the Middle East.
They
have decided
it was domestic. It was hatred of Trump and his right-wing policies and his anti-immigration strike. Americans do not vote on foreign policy issues. They just don't. They never have. Yes, there is a tiny minority element that, on one side, you can talk about the percentage of the MAGA Republicans, right, that have a foreign policy conception of an American foreign policy that doesn't involve, confrontation with Russia and China, that is retrenchment in the Western Hemisphere. But the number of people who vote with a principle for that reason is small. And to be fair, if there's any MAGA Republicans out there watching this video, you're part of that small part, and you probably understand that, right? The same thing with the Democrats. Yes, there is a minority who prioritize, things like the Gaza, and they make noise, right? They have protests, they have everything. But ultimately, that's not how and why Americans vote.